How are you feeling, America? Just 34% of voters say they are better off today than they were 4 years ago. Let's find out what America thinks right now on the Scott Rasmussen Show. Good morning and welcome to the Scott Rasmussen Show. I'm Scott, and joining me today, as always, my co-host, E.D. Hill. Good morning, E.D.
Good morning, Scott, and welcome, America. Thank you for joining us again. The Democrat National Convention is over, but not before protesters broke through security fencing, forcing more steel cages, concrete barriers. Police officers were pepper sprayed, pelted with objects. Arrests even occurred before the opening gavel dropped. But the chaos on the outside, very different than what was going on the inside. Very celebratory.
Very celebratory, star-studded gala type of feel. A lot of joy in the room was one of the big themes. Barack Obama, as he did a long time ago in the 2004 convention, hit a note of unity that we don't see in politics very often.
I think it was very noticeable that what he did was he didn't say who the party didn't want or didn't like. He tried to say, we'll take you all.
Right.
We'll listen to everybody. And that I think that's always what set him apart, and it certainly did again.
Right. And the reality is both political parties have run conventions designed to appeal to their base and nobody else. Now, part of the reason for that is the people watching these conventions are their base and professional journalists and nobody else. Swing voters aren't tuning in, and in fact, most casual voters aren't tuning in.
Well, if you're looking for policy, don't bother tuning in because they didn't really talk about that. It was striking to me because Democrats have controlled the White House for 12 of the last 16 years, and all the problems that they talked about certainly didn't occur in just a 4-year period, but there wasn't much discussion about what we're going to do to fix where we have gotten to.
But Edie, look, you've been through this enough. If I tell a Democrat that a Republican believes water is wet, the Democrat's going to say, no, it isn't. We're in that polarized divide that makes these events really hard to watch sometimes, either one of them.
A bit later on, we will discuss Harris's plans further as we compare the economy today versus 4 years ago. Of course, it's impossible not to remember how that question determined the presidency when Ronald Reagan, 1 week before the 1980 election, in the one debate with President Carter, asked America, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? Scott will share what Americans are saying to that question in the polls. And remember that unless we state otherwise, all the polls cited on our show are conducted by Scott's firm, which is RMG Research. Right now, though, let's hear Scott's thoughts this week. So what's on your mind?
Over the past month, Vice President Harris has had an exceptionally strong start to her presidential campaign. The Democratic National Convention this past week provided another good storyline for her, and it was capped by an acceptance speech that was better than many had expected. Still, while the political world was captivated by the convention, most Americans weren't. As a result, the convention had very little impact on the race for the White House. 2 weeks ago, RMG polling conducted for the Neapolitan Institute found that Donald Trump and Kamala Harris were tied at 49% among likely voters. Last week, just before the convention started, Trump was still at 49%. Harris slipped a couple of points back to 47%. Now with the convention behind us, it's back to tied at 49%, so a very stable race. Looking back, it appears that Harris received a pre-convention bounce when she became the nominee. In fact, she moved briefly to a 5-point lead over former President Trump. That bounce is now gone, and the race, it's just too close to call. And as always, because the election is close, there's a small army of political junkies out there. They're obsessing over national and swing state polling. They're diving into crosstabs to try and divine who will win. Realistically, however, the answer will not be found in any of the numbers that are out there today. If you're really trying to understand the election, a better use of time would be to consider the dynamics of the race and then think about what could happen to change those dynamics. We have one candidate who is very well known. Love him or hate him, people have strong opinions about Donald Trump, and those opinions are going to be very hard to change. The other candidate, Vice President Harris remains virtually unknown. So one factor that could change the race are shifting public opinions of Kamala Harris. But even with that, there are limits to how much of an impact it could have. I mean, let's face it, even if Harris voters are discouraged by what they learn, most of them will still line up to vote against Donald Trump. So given all of that, the biggest single event that could change the race is the scheduled ABC presidential debate. Normally, I downplay the significance of debates. They hardly ever have an impact, but there was an exception earlier this year. I mean, President Biden's performance forced him out of the race entirely. But with Harris unknown and Trump unpredictable, that debate could really have an outsized impact on what is now a very close race. It might move the needle just enough to be decisive. Now, while the debate is the one political event we know about that could change the election, changes in the real world probably matter more, and they're harder to predict. Will the economy get better or will it get worse? Will pro-Palestinian protests erupt on campus, and how will they be handled? The bottom line is that the reason the race is impossible to predict is not just because the polls say it's close. It's because we don't know what's going to happen next. Those are my thoughts.
Scott, as you know, is the brilliant, accurate pollster. I tend
Wait a
to
minute.
judge.
I want to hear that again. No, sorry.
Never again. Judge everything with my gut. And so this summer, you heard me railing about the outrageous fast food prices, the cost of gas, interest rates, everything. Well, the DNC was pretty short on policy specifics, but the Democrat Party platform was released. It calls for continuing and expanding most of the Biden-Harris policies from the past 3.5 years. So how do Americans feel about the state of the country? And most importantly, how do you feel about your own finances? Scott has the latest polling.
Well, and Edie, that part about your own finances, that's what really drives it. It's not some theory about how's the economy doing.
Yeah.
So let's start. 43% of voters do tell us they think the economy is in a recession. It's not a great number. It was worse a couple of years ago. It's trending slightly down. One big thing with this number and any questions about the economy, whichever party controls the White House feels more optimistic, whichever is the out party feels less optimistic. So right now, more Republicans are saying we're in a recession, and Democrats are saying, no, that was in the past.
It's fine.
That's right. Kamala Harris has released some thoughts on her plans, starting with the first ever federal ban on price gouging. She's doing this because people are concerned about inflation. She talked about the issue.
But the issue is that almost every state already has price gouging laws or consumer protection laws that address it.
Okay. People don't sit around studying the price gouging laws in their states. If that's a serious concern to voters, the Trump administration or the Trump campaign has to bring that out. She's also proposed a series of subsidies for home buyers, some pretty generous grants there. That's addressing a concern. People are very frustrated about their inability to buy a home and to sell. Talks about canceling $7 billion of medical debt. You know, you go to the hospital, you never know what the bills are going to be. She also wants to make a $3,600 child care tax credit permanent. People with a lot of children, Edie.
That's me, 8 kids. We love that tax credit for kids.
But also, and I think this is an area of policy we're going to hear a lot more about. She's proposing a $6,000 tax credit for people with newborn children. There's a lot of discussion about how do you help families as they first become parents. A lot of changes. You don't sleep very much, but it can be the best time of your life, and they're trying to remove some pressures.
So, but the issue that I had as when I'm listening to all this is it sounds lovely. I mean, it's like world peace. Of course I want it. But what does it cost? And when you take a look at something like this or that, or the $25,000 for new home buyers, where does the money come from, and how does that not push our country further down? Well,
it comes from you, and it comes from me.
Gee, thanks, Scott. You volunteered me for this?
Absolutely. 62% of voters say they're kind of like price controls. Why? They're not necessarily thinking of a particular policy. They're thinking, what can stop the growth of prices? Every time I go to the grocery store, every time I go to a fast food restaurant, prices are higher.
Well, price controls, if you're a huge company versus you're say a small farmer, completely different things.
That's right.
And if you're controlling their costs aren't the same.
That's right. And by the way, we've had an experiment with this before. Richard Nixon did impose wage and price controls back in the 70s. First day, stock market soared, recession followed. The policies don't work when you really get
Didn't
into
work
price.
for Republicans, may not work for Democrats.
That's right. But right now, 52% of voters think that federally government imposed price controls would be good for the economy. That's, again, this is something that it's a first blush response. People haven't had this discussion. We're going to watch where that number
Think
goes.
about it longer. Yeah, the economy.
Yeah. Overall, 1 out of 4 voters say the economy is good or excellent. 27% say it's getting better. And twice as many, 54%, tell us the economy is getting worse. That trend, not very encouraging.
All you have to do is go to the grocery store or fill up your car.
Well, and people are concerned about jobs and buying homes and lots of other things.
Yep.
Ultimately, is your income keeping up with inflation? 23% of voters say their finances are getting better. 38% say their finances are getting worse. This is a net negative 15. That number has been steady for a few months. If pessimism declines, that's really good for Team Harris. If pessimism increases between now and November, well, that's good news for Team Trump. This trend, this is the single most important political economic indicator that is out there. Put it all together, though, 34% of voters, 1 out of 3, say they're better off than they were 4 years ago.
That's the big question.
That's right, the Ronald Reagan question from long ago. And it's funny, I mean, if you really think about where we were in the midst of a pandemic 4 years ago. So, but this is an attitude that they have, that things seem to be going off the rails right now. Ultimately, politically, the question is, who do voters trust on these issues?
Trump used to have a big lead on this.
Right. Right now, 45% of voters tell us they trust Trump more on economic issues. 42% trust Kamala Harris, a 3-point gap. 2 weeks ago, Trump had a 13-point advantage on this issue. What I'm looking for is this just a blip because she addressed some policies and they haven't been vetted yet? Or is this something, a big shift in the race on the most important issue that's out there?
I can tell you what I view from looking at this. Who do I trust to give me accurate information? Us. And do you know why? Again, one of those gut things, because both of them are smiling and look really good in the photos, and most programs that you watch will make one look horrible and the other person look great, depending on which way they lean. They're both
Good
happy.
gut analysis.
One of the most brilliant political strategists in recent memory, James Carville, is quoted as telling Bill Clinton, "The economy's stupid." It still is the economy, but it's who voters trust to handle the economy that is tightening between Trump and Harris. Trump at 45%, Harris at 42%. And our hope is that when you watch our program, it helps you make sense of the information because it's often changing and it's frequently confusing. So I found this interesting. As the vice president is trying to sell her economic acuity, the Bureau of Labor Statistics announced that it was making the largest correction in job growth numbers in years. It turns out there were 800,000 fewer jobs created than previously reported. Without a job, among other things, it's pretty hard to afford a house. Harris believes that having the government give people money is the answer. So what do the voters think?
Well, actually, Edie, let's go to that correction, 818,000 fewer jobs. You know, voters don't sit around and workers don't sit around studying the job creation stats. They look at what's going on around them. They look at what's happening at their company. The economists, the elites were looking at the official stats and saying voters were really stupid to think the economy was doing poorly. Well, it turns out the voters are right, the stats were wrong.
Yeah, because you look around you and you can feel what's going on. Right. If you look just at numbers, especially before they've been corrected,
right.
You know, there's always a flourish of activity when the number's announced. When the correction comes out, you don't hear a peep.
But historically, if you're working for a firm that is growing, you're feeling pretty good about the economy. If you're working for a company that is laying people off or maybe thinking of shutting down, you think the entire economy is falling apart. It's that personal experience that drives the voters more than the data.
Yeah, and I know that a lot of people, especially once their kids have moved out of the house, have been thinking about selling homes, getting smaller homes, but weren't able to because then they couldn't afford a new home because the prices had gone so high. And so this Harris idea about giving $25,000 to new home buyers, that seemed to be very popular.
It absolutely is. 61% of voters say they like that idea. Now, the reason, people are, younger people especially, trying to buy their first home, they can't figure out where to get the down payment from. Then they look at what the carrying costs are going to be because not only have the prices gone up, the mortgage rates have gone up.
Right.
That's a deep frustration that people are feeling. You want to buy a home. It's part of the American dream. So Harris came up with a plan that is appealing. Now, one thing that struck me about this, we asked the follow-up question. Is it fair to existing homeowners to give a $25,000 gift to first-time homeowners? Turns out Well, the overall voters are split, but even 38% of existing homeowners say, yeah, that's fair. Now, maybe they're just thinking the price of their home will go up too, or maybe they just
that's a very good point.
Yeah. So I think we're in a situation, you throw out these ideas, they're newish to most people. We'll see how, as people learn about the details, if they continue to have these thoughts. But right now, this is a very serious issue. You talk a lot about the price at a fast food restaurant or a grocery store. A lot of people talk about the price at the gas pump. But housing is a very serious and frustrating issue for a lot of younger Americans.
I'm still waiting to find out how we as a nation pay for everything. So I can't wait to hear the policy details.
I'm sure they're coming.
Don't go away. When we come back, we are going to look at both political party conventions and how conventions have actually changed quite a bit over the years. Do they mean as much as they used to? Stay right there. Welcome back to the Scott Rasmussen Show. I'm E.D. Hill. Let's turn our attention back to the past week's DNC. So, how do you think the Republicans did versus the Democrats? What was your thought?
Both parties appealed to their base. I think they both fired up their base. If a Republican mistakenly watched the Democratic convention, they thought it was awful. If a Democrat watched the Republican convention, it was awful. No hearts and minds were changed, but maybe some people were excited about their team a little bit more.
You know what strikes me is, again, I go back to what do you see in your life? So my life, my very left-leaning daughter, Laurel, DNC all day, all night. She's watching that thing like a hawk. My very right-leaning son, Matt, was watching the RNC. The ones who are really in the middle,
they're not watching.
Moving on with life.
So, we started the show talking about Ronald Reagan's quote from 1980. Conventions then had huge audiences. Now, there were two reasons for it. One was there were only 3 television networks, so you had to watch. If you turned on the TV, the conventions were there. But also, in 1980, the conventions mattered. Ronald Reagan went into the convention knowing he was going to be the nominee. They had massive debates and negotiations about who would be the vice presidential candidate. We didn't know until the final night that when they announced the nomination of the VP. The Democratic convention that year, Ted Kennedy was challenging Jimmy Carter. I was at that convention, and there was something very serious. Carter had the delegates, but the opening vote was from Kennedy saying, we want to free the delegates to vote for who they want. Yeah. These conventions had audiences because they mattered.
They were reality TV.
That's right. The modern conventions, look, they're competing with a Netflix series, so the audiences aren't there.
Yeah, you're definitely not. From what I see is the people who are undecided aren't watching this because, like me, they're waiting to see what the policy points are. So you want to know how people are accomplishing.
All right, but now let's address that. There's a lot of people who aren't watching, and they're not like you because they're not looking for the policy points. They're not watching because they're living life. They're out getting their kids back to school, bringing somebody to college. They're out watching a baseball game. Some of them are excited about football season coming. Lots of things going on in their lives. And basically, they don't trust anything a politician says anyhow, so why would they spend all this time watching a debate?
They don't need to. They can do that all week long, and on Sunday, watch us, and we'll give them the information.
I think that's a good
advice. Give it accurately. We are just about out of time. The polls will continue changing moving toward November, and to help keep you on track, you can go now online to napolitannews.org to see the polling data that we discuss. So, okay, Scott, what is the number not to forget this week?
We talk lots of numbers, but the one not to forget this week, only 34% of voters say they are better off today than they were 4 years ago. That was the Reagan question, and it's a very important one. That's it for this week on the Scott Rasmussen Show. Stay connected with us all week long. For E.D. Hill and the entire team that helped put this program together, I'm Scott Rasmussen. America, have a great week.